Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we are playing as Lizardmen against the forces of Brettonia on the map Evrail Ridge. And in my opinion, this is one of those matchups that in most ways is very favorable for the Lizardmen. Brettonia definitely struggles against large, fairly well armored, armor-piercing monsters. Units like the Carnosaur, just so nasty. Even Lord Mazdamundi, of course, despite not being dedicated anti-large, is really strong on his Stegodon, of course, on Zlak, the Bastillodons as well. Brettonia just struggles to take out these large single-target monsters. However, there's one advantage that Brettonia does enjoy, and that is an incredible threat, and that is the Green Knight. Lizardmen don't have much access to magic damage. Their only magic damage is a handful of magic missiles. Slann, if they're not mounted, which is obviously not something you want to be doing. You don't want to be doing the Green Knight with a Slann. And then they do have Bastillodons with solar engines, and that's really your most reliable source of magic damage, if you can call it one. So I decided to bring them, and I really wanted to sort of build a composition that could hopefully counter whatever my opponent did bring. So for my front line, I went fairly cheap on shielded Saurus warriors, so definitely had to make a bit of a sacrifice there, and that's not good. Having to drop shields against Brettonia, which can bring quite a lot of shooting, and in this case did bring a lot of shooting, is not necessarily a great idea, but I really felt that I needed to cut some corners somewhere, and so that's where it happened. So 2 units of Star Spears out on the flanks, Saurus Warriors in the center, and then, well, I guess Saurus Warriors more towards the middle, and then Temple Guard anchoring things in this very center. And of course, these guys can hold for a very, very long time, especially against Brettonian troops who just aren't that good at rooting them out. Unfortunately, Foot Squires do trade pretty well with all these units, so that is something to keep in mind. For my Lord, I did bring Lord Mazdamundi, who I think is great. I did bring a net so that if my opponent did decide to bring the Green Knight, and like I said, he's probably the biggest threat in this matchup. So I figured if my opponent does bring the Green Knight, I will have the net of a Mintok, which can net him down, and then I can shoot him down with the solar engines. Of course, he does have the Soul-Blooded. I did bring the Sunburst Standard of Exoatl. I did bring Harmonic Convergence, Curse of the Midnight Wind for the debuffs, as well as Apotheosis. And then, of course, Shield of the Old Ones, which I think is great in this matchup. Brettonia has a lot of sources of magic damage. A lot of their top-tier cavalry does magic damage. So Shield of the Old Ones can definitely be very useful there. Ruination of Cities, as well as Banishment, of course, for annihilating those annoying infantry blobs that Brettonia can bring and did bring in this situation. Alongside him, 2 Bastillodons with solar engines, as we discussed, a Saurus Scarvet on a Carnosaur with the Plaque of Dominion, which I think, and I'm often surprised people don't bring these when they bring a Carnosaur Scarvet. Just so good. It's basically like a Blood Roar that you can have to activate. It's not a constant effect, but honestly, between the shock effect of a Carnosaur hitting a unit and then Fear, Terror, Plaque of Dominion, you can often force a rout almost instantly, especially against low-end troops like Brettonia's. Then we do have 2 units of Star Spears with shields, and these guys are there to provide some additional anti-large support in the backline. Now, my opponent caught me a little bit by surprise here with his build, and it's not the build I would recommend necessarily, though I do think it's actually a surprisingly decent composition. For his Lord, he did bring a Prophetess of Light, who is very cheap. I think that's her one saving grace. Otherwise, she's not particularly great. She's basically a bad Fey Enchantress. She does have an interesting ability here, the Assault of Stone, which I do believe she got recently. And this is an interesting bombardment spell. I've never really seen it used, mostly because I've never really see Prophetess of Light take the field. So we'll see how it does. Otherwise, Arcane Conduit or Earthblood, Life Boom, Regrowth, so the usual stuff. Out in the Vanguard, my opponent did deploy 2 units of Mounted Yeomen, who are a bit of an oddball choice in this matchup, because I guess against Chameleon Skinks they can do okay, but I'd figure that Brettonian Cav is good enough at dealing with Chameleon Skinks. I don't really think Mounted Yeomen are that good of a choice here. In the back, 2 Grail Knights, 1 on either end, as well as the Knights of the Realm and the Knights of the Lionhearted. So a good bit of anti-large cav, though definitely no AP. Normally I would recommend, say, bringing Questing Knights or units like that to really stiffen things up, to really give you some armor-piercing damage on the field, but my opponent decided to opt out of those, so in favor of going much heavier on the infantry blob. He did bring a bunch of peasant mobs here in the front, always good for soaking up those charges, a single Grail Relic to provide immunity to Psychology, 2 Foot Squires, as well as the Regiment of Renown, the Beast Slayers of Bastogne, so a very solid sort of anchor force here. 2 Men-at-Arms with polearms on the flanks, and then a bunch of peasant bowmen in the back. Surprisingly enough, no Paladin and no Green Knight, both of which I think are 2 of the honestly better choices in this matchup. I'm not a big fan of the Paladin, even with the rework. He's still kind of mediocre, but in this matchup I think he's pretty good, and I do think the Green Knight is just stellar in this matchup, especially if you can just put him on good targets. He's just so hard to kill and so difficult to deal with. Regardless, I'm immediately pushing forwards, trying to sort of scout out my opponent's troop zone, stuff out. I did figure that he had something hidden here in the woods, even though I couldn't see it at first. And shortly thereafter, I'm kind of proven right as my opponent pushes some troops in. The initial engagement, not much, is mostly just posturing. I was trying to push my Bastillodons up to snipe the Grail Relic, figuring maybe they'll be accurate enough. I was completely wrong. The Grail Relic is a pretty small target, and the Bastillodons are very inept, and so they whiff, I think, four shots in total on the Grail Relic before I finally wisen up and stop shooting it. So you can see there a volley going in and whiffs and whiffs. No damage done, so pretty pitiful, and definitely not a most fortuitous start for the Bastillodons. Makes me question how good they'd actually do against the Green Knight if he was coming at him. But regardless, we are going to shift targets. These guys both sitting at 0 kills and very little damage done. Here, he even misses the peasants. And I was aiming at the beast layers of Brettonia. You can see this guy waddling up a little bit. The terrain here is not exactly the most favorable. I was really trying to get some shots into the beast layers of Brettonia because I figured they're probably one of the biggest threats in the long run. And you can see I'm starting to get my casts off. Ruination of Cities going down. You can see plows through the peasant mob, which is probably the least useful thing it could do. But another sort of ray there does strike the peasant bowmen. I do personally wish Ruination of Cities was a little more consistent, but unfortunately it is not. Over here though, you can see I did get a little lucky with banishment, and it does pile straight through these foot squires. It does a good bit of damage on the unit, and then it continues backwards. Now, and you can see it's actually getting into the bowman. This is something my opponent should probably try to move out of the way, and he doesn't. Instead, he got a little greedy here with his bows, and they're going to get minced up. So the opening moves are definitely being pretty favorable to me. Unfortunately, you can see that peasant bowfire already whittling away at my Star Spears, who I'm sort of trying to brace here for the charge from the Knights of the Realm, for the Grail Knights, all those units. In the meantime, though, I'm starting to pick away at these Grail Knights with the Bastillodon Solar Engines. Unfortunately, unlike, say, a Ballista, these guys, one, don't have AP damage, which sucks. But two, they also don't have much pierce effect, which I was a little shocked by. They hit the Grail Knights, and they've only picked off 4 models with, I think, 2 shots, which is pretty bad. You can see here they're charging in. If this was a cannonball, these Grail Knights would just get vaporized. You'd probably see like 6 of them go down, but it's not. And so definitely some second point of disappointment. I don't really use, to be quite frank, I don't really use solar engines very often. So I was a bit caught off guard by how badly they were doing. I still think it would have been good for my opponent brought a Green Knight, but in this situation, they're kind of flunking. That shot there exploded. It does seem to have a good AoE, so it exploded, killed 3 models, but yeah, you can see we're picking them apart slowly but surely. So my opponent hits him with a regrowth, but that's not really good here. That's actually a very bad idea because these guys do magic damage. Regrowth only provides physical resistance, and I'm not really damaging units. I'm killing models here. So you can see these guys are getting nothing out of it, so a big waste of Winds of Magic, a bit of a mistake on my opponent's part, but definitely beneficial for myself. Over here in the meantime, you can see the Prophetess of Life wrapping up my Star Warriors. I did actually manage to rout off quite a section of these troops, but after that, my opponent's Heavy Cav has just been running amok. You can see these Men-at-Arms with pole arms here, combined with these Knights of the Realm just trashing my Saurs. Over here, Grail Knights surrounding the Saur Scarvet, who is fighting pretty well. It's still a pretty powerful single model entity here, and he is definitely going to be laying a smack whooping on these Grail Knights. And you can see I've pulled the spears in there, they just started rampaging. But these Grail Knights are not in the neighborhood they want to be in. And you can see, with the big thing here is that we're picking off models, which means that the Prophetess of Life, despite having all those heals, is not going to be able to do too much. Over here, the bombardment does go down. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to do very much damage, unfortunately for my opponent, unfortunately for me. Over here in the meantime, the Bastillodon getting surrounded. You can see how that 140 armor is really kicking in. Now, granted, with exhaustion, you're probably looking at more like 100 armor, but you can see just how much survivability we were getting here. I do try to get a Ruination of Cities off on these Grail Knights. It does a little bit of damage, those rays kind of striking out a bit, but really nothing too fancy. But you can see the Bastillodon's just nearly unkillable. Men-at-Arms with polearms now piling in, just trying to get some damage in there, but definitely a bit of a grim situation. I do cast an Apotheosis on these Star Spears, and the balance of power up has basically not shifted. It might be a tiny bit in my favor right now, but things are definitely still very, very much on the fence here. My opponent, although definitely getting sort of getting dumpstered in the cavalry engagements repeatedly. His Grail Knights here down to 20 models. Over here we can see another unit, Knights of the Realm, 22 models, 15 Grail Knights. Over there, it's some mounted yeomen, I think. So all these low-end trash units who are just falling. Well, some of these are high-end units, but the high-end units are basically dumpstered. The low-end units are doing basically nothing, and they're really struggling here. So that's good for me. But my opponent's infantry corps has trashed my infantry corps. Sure, 1-to-1, Star Warriors will beat units like Men-at-Arms with pole arms. They'll beat Men-at-Arms. They'll beat Foot Squires probably. But there's just so many of them, and they've got this archer support. And these archers have really been doing a lot of work, and it doesn't really show in the kill counts, but the damage they've been doing has really added up over time, and you can see just even the Temple Guard now buckling on 19 models, so really some rough stuff. Here in the pits, the Dinosaurs Scarvet, the Lord Mazdamundi, and the Bastillodon with the Solar Engine holding their ground, doing their best. You can see I do get a nice little shot there, and the Knights of Lionhearted and the Peasant Mob, so getting some damage in constantly. But really, the kill counts aren't exactly impressive. Solar Scarvet, 32 kills, most of which are Knights, is definitely not a bad thing, but for a lot of these other units, really the kill count's not too great. Lord Mazdamundi, of course, with his magic, doing some good stuff. Unfortunately, over here, the spears are going to collapse finally. They're finally going to give out, surrounded by Knights, Grail Knights hitting him from all flanks, Knights of the Lionhearted, units like that. Really just doing a number on my troops. But unfortunately for my opponent here, he's wandered away from his Grail Relic. He's just over here with his main body. And that means that he's not getting that immunity psychology here. These halberds getting completely trashed by just this mob of monsters. And now Brettonia is in a bit of a pickle. Their cavalry, which was really their main stopping force against these sorts of monsters, is now very badly depleted. They're in terrible shape. They don't have much AP. Now, granted, there's still some arrows left, there's still some archers left, but these guys don't have much AP either, and they're not accurate, especially against a moving dinosaur. You can see they're just whiffing entire volleys there. Nothing too impressive. Lord Mazdamundi still has 6,000 HP that my opponent needs to chew through. Even with the Beast Slayers of Bastogne in there, it's going to be a really tough fight. I do cast the Curse of the Midnight Wind. You can see Mazdamundi just moving around. Of course, the one Bastillodon here does get routed simply from how much from being surrounded and how much damage is taken, but really my opponent is starting to suffer some major damage here. These Knights of the Lionheart falling apart, and you can see the balance of power, which just a little bit was more balanced, is slowly but surely shifting back in my favor and away from my opponent. Mazdamundi, of course, that huge HP pool is really the main thing propping things up here. My opponent diving in, but all this magic damage being dropped by 44% thanks to the Shield of the Old Ones. And now I do hit the Star Scarvet with the Harmonic Convergence, which is actually going to barely stabilize his stats, or his leadership there. We do hit him with an Apotheosis, something I should have done a while ago, and that's going to start giving him that replenishment that he needs to really stick around. And we do hit a Plaque of the Minion here, debuffing all these guys' leadership. Grail Knights, you can see, falling apart. These Knights of the Lionhearted routing off, and that really just leaves this single unit of Grail Knights who are now in a terrible spot, facing off against Mazdamundi, against the Dinosaurs Scarvet, and we do get a nice little banishment here, which just melts this unit or blob of troops, which at this point means that my opponent is in a bit of a dire situation. At this point, we've managed to basically shift things around. You can see the bounce of power now hidden somewhere behind the sword here, which means it's very much on my side of things. These peasants over here, broken. It's really just a single crippled unit of archers that can still do much. And otherwise, this cav is basically out of it. Even if my opponent decides to say flee from me, the Dinosaurs Scarvet, of course, can pursue. He is pretty quick on his feet. And, now we're basically just farming kills. We do jump in against the Grail Relic here because that is the most important unit to knock out. It's keeping all these troops afloat. But seeing then that my opponent is trying to pick off my Bastillodons, we do actually shift targets and are going to just leave this here. And that is a big problem here, that my opponent is kind of, as long as he can stay around the Grail Relic, he's in an okay spot, but because he can't afford to wait and sit around the Grail Relic, he's forced to sort of pull out, come here and fight me, and it is going to be game at this point. So quickly going over, summarizing, definitely not the most ideal situation for me, definitely not the most ideal play. The SARS troops, despite being very strong, just kind of got run over by archery fire, by withering fire from the archers, by damage from the foot squires, by rear charges from the cavalry. The Bastillodons with solar engines just couldn't really leave that much of a dent. They were whiffing shots. I think out of their first, they basically got nothing out of the first 3 shots on each of them. So that was really rather pitiful. That was really some trouble. That said, the Anchor Squad here did really well. This is one of the big problems for Brettonia. If you don't bring a Green Knight, if you don't bring a Paladin, especially, and if you don't bring Questing Knights, if you don't bring those 3 units, you are going to be struggling a huge amount when you're trying to deal with single monsters. Even Grail Knights, despite being anti-large, are going to suffer pretty heavily. They're going to struggle to really dish out the hurt. They've got less armor piercing, I think, than Blood Knights do, so they're definitely not in the ideal situation there. Interesting choice to the Prophetess of Life from my opponent. Definitely surprising. I think she might be okay. I might have to give her a shot sometime, but I do think the Fan Enchantress is generally better, especially if you're not trying to bring her on a flying mount. But yeah, great game to my opponent. I did have a lot of fun. It's always fun to try Lizardmen with something new. I wasn't that pleased with the Bastillodons, at least not for their shooting. Their melee seemed to be okay, but that's kind of to be expected. So, regardless, good game. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, anything like that, be sure to share them, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.